listening to Seminary Dropout, and I'm your host, Shane Blackshear. Somewhere in between seminary and youth camp, it's Seminary Dropout. Let's go. Hey, friend. Well, we are at the end of our sponsorship with the independent publisher Greatest Stories Ever Told. I just can't impress upon you how much you need what they have to offer, specifically the two books that I've been talking about for the last, 12 weeks now, Decoding Nicaea, and the other one was Forgotten Gospel. These two are gems. Decoding Nicaea, it's great to just sit down and read all the way through, but I plan on keeping this and using it for reference for future blog posts, sermons, all kinds of stuff. It's going to be a great reference. It's everything you want to know about the Council of Nicaea, and it's fascinating, illuminating, and it's relevant to today. And then Forgotten Gospel, again, talking about the real meaning of gospel, some things that N.T. Wright, Scott McKnight have explored, friends of the show. And so it's fit well. And so please, if you like Seminary Dropout, support our sponsors. I've got links to this on the show notes. If you're listening from an app, you probably got a way to look at those show notes. If you're listening from the iTunes app, you can just click on the cover art for Seminary Dropout, and it'll show you all the show notes. You can click on a link to Greatest Stories Ever Told right there. And I doubt it's the last we've seen of Greatest Stories Ever Told and their authors. I bet we will probably be in contact with them in the future. All right. Thanks so much, and enjoy this great interview. My guest today is Jeremy Jernigan. Jeremy serves as an executive pastor at Central Christian Church in the Phoenix area. He's a second-generation preacher with a passion for discovering and communicating truth. Jeremy has been married to Michelle for 10 years, and they live in Arizona with their 4 kids. Jeremy, thanks for joining me.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Your book, Redeeming Pleasure, is what we're here to talk about today. I realize the book is essentially about uncovering a false dichotomy between living a life where we're miserable for Jesus or where we believe in Jesus, but we kind of just ignore the stuff he says and the stuff that he was about so that we can have fun. I wonder if there was a time in your life when you bought into one of those two ways of thought and how that played out.
Yeah, so I grew up in the church. My dad is a pastor, so I'm a second generational preacher. So a lot of, I think when I grew up, I grew up far more conservative than I am these days. We'll put it that way. And so I think I erred into one of those categories. And even in high school, I started seeing kind of the dichotomy separate, where there were these people that decided, hey, I want to pursue God, and so that means I cannot pursue pleasure as well. And I watched it really turn them into these legalistic, very boring, very just sad-looking Christians, and that's how they thought they were going to be faithful. And on the other hand, I watched people go, well, I'm not willing to give up pleasure, and so I'm going to pursue pleasure, but that means I have to give up on God. And the whole idea of like a guilty pleasure. And I just remember watching this, decades ago and going, where do we get this? Like that these are the two choices. And in doing ministry since then, I've just watched this, I watch people go through this. And so what I've attempted to do is say, look, I understand the tendency to go one of those two directions, but I don't think you have to choose between those two choices.
Pastors really get the meta narratives of what's going on in society because you may hear something once or twice and not think anything of it, but I found that my pastor friends often hear a lot of the same things over and over again. And I'm wondering if that was part of the reason for you to write this book, because you saw the same struggles people were having over and over again.
Oh, absolutely. And I watch Christians especially struggle with a very heavy view of God that weighs on them and creates guilt and creates this just legalism and these expectations and for so many of them, they'll sit in my office with me and pour their heart out, and I'm exhausted for them, and I'm like going, where are you picking all this up from? And so, my hope always is just to show people, look, I want you to experience the Jesus I have experienced. I want to show you that, I think you might be a little different than maybe you've heard before. And I believe the best thing I can do as a pastor, as a writer, as a human, is just to point people to Jesus and go, hey, look, if you experience that guy, I think he'll change everything. And yet, especially in our post-Christendom culture in America, there's a lot of baggage that people bring with them about God that, as a pastor, I hear over and over. But I have to help people work through it.
Why do you think that pleasure has gotten a bad rap?
Because I think we've watched it be abused. And so we've kind of relegated it maybe to, that belongs to Satan. That's Satan's creation, and God's not comfortable with that. And yet, if you go all the way back to the first pages of Scripture, in the book of Genesis, it just tells this incredible story about humans and pleasure and our view of God. And regardless of whether someone thinks Adam and Eve are real people, or they are representative of a story, or it's poetry, or wherever you land on that. I think the most important part of that story is that the very first struggle that the Bible tells us about is humanity wrestling with how to achieve pleasure. And I find that fascinating, and God creates this entire garden for them. It's like, look, enjoy this. This is going to be incredible. I made this for you. And there's a design though, and there's a limitation there. And he says, hey, don't eat from that one tree, everything else, just enjoy it. But that one tree, don't do that. And what is the lie that Satan convinces them of, oh, look, the reason why God doesn't want you to do that is because you'll get more pleasure if you do. And yet, really, my premise in the book is whenever we pursue pleasure on our terms, we actually experience less of it. Hmm. And so the lie, all the way back to the garden, is no, you get more of it if you do it your own way. The lie is that it's not true. You don't get more. You actually get less. And so if we want to live the life to the full that Jesus talked about in John chapter 10, we've got to actually trust him as the designer of pleasure and go back to, hey, pleasure is a good thing. C.S. Lewis in Screwtape Letters argues this is like, the demons, Satan can't create pleasure. All he can do is distort it. And so he takes something that God has created and says, hey, do it on your terms. And when we do that, pleasure can definitely go awry.
Well, let's talk about some of those specific areas of life. What to you is the most glaring as you're a pastor and you're talking to your people? Like, what do you see people get? What area of life do they most often get it wrong concerning pleasure?
That's a great question. I think it depends on the person, and even maybe the age of the person. I think sex is probably, I would say, the universal one if I had to pick one. When I've shared, when I preached on this message to our church, I said, hey, a lot of people, when they see a book on pleasure, they're thinking, oh, he wrote a book on sex.
Right.
And I said, it's not a book on sex. It's much more holistic than that. I said, but I do have a chapter on it. And I said, it's chapter 4 if anyone wants to know. And it literally, that was like the joke all weekend. People come through like, oh, we can't wait to read chapter 4. And it was like, okay, well, I understand that. And so I even, make a joke in the book, like, look, if you just open up to chapter 4, I understand it. I get it. But, I hope to broaden the category. So I think sex is one that it's really hard to follow some of the biblical instruction on that, and it can easily feel outdated when you look at, your friends around you and what the culture is doing. And yet sex is one that has hurt a lot of people. And so I think, our culture and entertainment loves to really idealize, hey, just go sleep with that person, that you like, and you don't need to have any other baggage. And yet we don't spend enough time depicting the morning after and the feelings that go with that. And I spend a lot of time, working with the results of that in people's lives. People who now are married years later and are trying to process through, hey, I've got a lot of baggage with my spouse because of bad decisions I made about sex, years ago. And so I think that's probably the biggest one. But, for a lot of people, it's alcohol. For some people, it's tobacco. It's entertainment. Some Christians are paranoid if they've watched a rated R movie and they're, unsure of whether or not God still loves them after that. And And so I think you can look at any of these pleasures and go, yeah, any of them done wrong can really screw someone up.
It sounds like a lot of people have a lot of baggage from growing up in very conservative or fundamentalist circles.
Yeah.
That the kind of the background you discussed. It's been a long time since I've been around a circle who, um, judged people for going to rated R movies, and we kind of forget that that's an issue with some people, but some people really struggle with those kind of things.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And again, that's not our church culture, but um, I'll travel around. I'll be talking to people, and you just see that these are different issues, and if you're in the Bible Belt, there's a whole different set of issues that in Arizona are not issues for us. There's churches even around us. We don't have it, but where you have to sign a staff contract that you won't drink or use tobacco,
Oh, absolutely.
and that's fairly common, and so I think for just a lot of people, we're just not really sure what to do with pleasure. We're not really sure. And so whether it's the R-rated movie for the one person, or a glass of wine, or beer, or a cigarette, or whatever we're talking about, we're just not really sure. And I think the easier thing to say is, oh yeah, just avoid those. Like, God probably doesn't like that, so you should avoid it. But I think that actually hinders people, and it creates legalism if we never enter into that conversation.
Had one of my seminary professors had just this great line. He said that the allure of fundamentalism is that it draws these well marked lines for us to not cross, and oftentimes the Bible doesn't do that. And so fundamentalism comes in and fills in those lines for us, and that's the lure of it, is that we don't have to. It's no longer a mystery because it's marked out, and it seems like a lot of us are plagued by those fundamentalist backgrounds for that reason.
Right. I mean, you look at the Pharisees; it's the same desire, and I think that the desire itself is not bad. They want to help people, and it certainly makes it easier in the sense of it's black and white. You don't have to constantly be working on it, and yet, like, with alcohol, the biblical mandate that I believe to be there, and what I argue in the book is, I think the argument is moderation. That it's not something you have to avoid at all costs. But I think the Bible speaks about, getting drunk or drinking to excess. But there is that moderation in between. And even if you look at the history of Christianity, there's been some very well-known Christians, who have championed moderation. And yet the hard part is moderation takes work, to do that, because how do you have a drink without having too many drinks? Well, that's harder than just saying I'm not going to drink. And so I think it's okay for a person, if any of these pleasures, if like, for example, with alcohol, a lot of people are prone to alcoholism, or they've had something in their family, and I certainly respect that, and say, hey, if that's the reason why you don't drink, that's absolutely fine. But I would also encourage them, don't make that a mandate for everyone else. And that's where I think the Phariseeism gets in, is where we start going, hey, this is good. This works for me. This is easier for me. And now I expect you to do it the way I do it, as opposed to going, yeah, look, I've decided this, but if someone else wants to pursue it in moderation, then, I need to be okay with that.
And it seems like, too, when we approach these things where there is no clear, line within Scripture, specific line, that when someone, seeks God and decides that for them that line is someplace that's different than mine, then I need to respect that, whether that line is farther away or closer than my line.
Yeah. And that's the beauty of, I believe, the church, is when we start to gather with people that are different than us and have different lines, than us. And so we say, hey, I'm not as okay with this as you are, but I also, realize that you're entitled to that, and there's biblical support for that. And when we decide to make room for one another, I think that's actually a beautiful picture of what the church can be. When we say, hey, let's coexist together. Let's follow Jesus together, and it's going to look differently for each of us. But when we have a tolerance to that, I think that's huge. And yet you look at so many of these church splits, or these really nasty stories of, well, we're against that, and we're coming out of that, and And really, most of those issues are like, yeah, you could have worked that out. You could have done something if you would have tried a little harder. But it's far easier just to say, hey, do it my way, and if you don't, then we're not gonna be a part of that.
I'm curious what you would say to someone who says, you know what, I find pleasure in, whatever it might be. Sex outside of marriage, drugs, what have you. Things that are outside of the boundaries in normal Orthodox Christianity. And those people that would say, I do these things and they bring me pleasure, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people that would make that argument.
Sure.
And I use the illustration in the book. If you watch a commercial on TV and they're advertising for an alcohol, okay, so take any alcohol, what they're going to show you is everybody drinking that alcohol and having a good time. They're at a party and it's great. What that commercial won't show you is what that does to the person the next day if they drink to excess. That you don't ever see that part on the commercials. And there's this deception in the way that I think our culture presents pleasure of, hey, it's going to be awesome, it's going to be everything you need, but there's this baggage to it that people don't like to talk about or like to admit, and yet you can see it logically, not even just scripturally, but you can see it logically and go, hey, okay, so which of these two scenarios would you rather have? Would you rather be married to a person and the two of you are the only ones that have ever had sex with each other? So you were virgins when you got married, you don't know anyone else. Or would you rather have a marriage where each of you have had more partners than you can remember, and so that's the comparison you bring into your current relationship? Well, most people, if they're honest, I think would choose the first one, but it just doesn't sound practical. It doesn't sound like that's a realistic thing. And so we make those kind of decisions on all these areas where we go, yeah, that's not even doable. And yeah, I love to just push on that argument a little bit. If someone say, oh yeah, I'm having it's everything I want it to be.
Right.
I think if you start talking and you start getting to the core of the person, you start realizing it's not. And I've seen this time and time again of people who, and often it just takes some life emergency or some epiphany or something to happen. I just had this, a guy I'd been praying for years, and something just happened major in his family, and all of a sudden he has this openness to God and this not disgust, but just this thought of all the things that he's been choosing that they're not as good as he thought they were. And literally just took this kind of life moment for this trigger, and that just illustrates to me is like, yeah, when you're in the middle of it, you're going to say, oh, that's amazing, this is great. And Craig Rochelle, I think, is one that says something like, if sin isn't fun, you're not doing it right. There's definitely a fun element in the moment of sin. But when we talk about pleasure, we're not talking about a momentary pleasure. We're talking about a fullness of pleasure. We're talking about that sense that, a day from now, a month from now, a year from now, I'm going to continue getting pleasure from this decision, as opposed to the consequences or the ramifications of it. And that to me is the big separation. God's pleasures, when you do it God's way, it always gets better and better. If you do it the way the world tells you and you do it on your own terms, it gets worse and worse as the consequences play themselves out.
When hindsight is 20/20, we really get perspective on things. And I think there's, most of us, there are probably decisions that we made 15, 20 years ago that we regret. And how much more perspective will we have when we're in our 70s, 80s, 90s?
Absolutely.
To evaluate whether or not those were good decisions that we made.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that you address is children and having kids. I'm curious how you see people getting that wrong as far as pleasure is concerned.
So what's funny is there's a few chapters in the book that I think kind of surprise people. So the parenting chapter is definitely one of those where at first glance they're like, why would this be in a book on pleasure? Is parenting not pleasurable? And work is another chapter in there that people go, why is this in there? And then there's just a few chapters in there, the chapter on how we treat other people are all in the same category of they're not the normal pleasures you think of. But when you think about parenting, parenting is really an unbelievable opportunity that we have available to us if we choose it. But parenting is it's fascinating. And, when I got married, my wife and I had the conversation of how many kids are we gonna have, and I was always in the camp. I want two. I want a boy and a girl, and that's it. And maybe we'll do three if we get two of the same sex. The first two. It's kind of the standard logic. And I remember my wife's like, I think it'd be cool to have a bigger family and even do it to adopt kids. And I'm like, yeah, that's not gonna happen. Like we're not. And so over the years, I believe through my wife and just through other sources, God began to soften my heart to that. And so now we have four kids. Our littlest one is a foster child who we're in the process of adopting. And he actually has a brother on the way in December who it's very likely we could get placed with him as well. And so at this point, I don't even know how many kids I'll finish with, which is kind of a terrifying thought, to be pretty honest with you. But what I've realized is when we pour ourselves out for our children, it is the gospel. I mean, it is like living the gospel up close and personal, because every day my kids present me an opportunity to live the gospel. Every day it's the decision right in front of me. Do I choose what I want or do I choose what they want? Do I choose to meet my needs or do I choose to lay that down and meet their needs? And parenting has an ability to do this really unlike anything else, because especially when they're young, they're always around you. And so it's like this constant battle. When I got married, I realized I'm a really selfish person. And then when we had our first kid, I realized, wow, I'm a really selfish person. And then every kid we have, I just keep realizing like I have so much more in me that I need to keep surrendering to God and doing that. But the irony is when I do it, and when I pour myself out to my children, I experience something in return that you can't get anywhere else. And it's cliche, but when your kids say those tagline movie comment lines to you as a parent, you overwhelmed by that. And I look into their eyes and I just realize like, wow, you guys are going to go make an impact long after I'm gone or I'm done, and it's just an incredible pleasure that can be found in it when we realize what a gift, what an opportunity that parenting presents for us, if we view it like that, as opposed to viewing it going, how many can I afford, and what's it going to cost me, and just viewing them as a drag instead of going, God, what an incredible blessing that I get to pour myself into another human and who is incredibly moldable and open to ideas. And I determine what is normal to them. That's a scary thought. And yet I think when parenting is done well, there is an unbelievable pleasure in the process.
It's kind of become almost a cliche for parents to get together and express how joyless parenting can be.
Yeah, I've been to those parties.
Yeah. Yeah. And, part of that is maybe some healthy venting, talking about how we're not getting enough sleep. And my line is that I'm constantly saving my daughter's life. She's like falling off the couch and I'm catching her, or something weird like that, walking near the open dishwasher with the knife sticking up, something like that.
Perfect.
But we're obviously still doing it, right? We keep having kids. There must be a reason we keep going.
My son, my 5-year-old son, currently has a cast on his arm, and he has 2 pins sticking through his arm because he launched himself off the monkey bars. So I'm very very in touch with that part. And yeah, when people ask me, and this is in the book, when people ask me, hey, what's parenting like? New parents, and I'll say it's the hardest thing you've ever done, and it's one of the greatest things you'll ever do. And both are true, and it's confusing that both are true. It's like, how could that be? But I really think they are. Another thing I think of is something John Ortberg once said to me. He said, the days are long, but the years are short. And I thought that is gold perspective on parenting. The days are long, and some days they can be so long. But that's why, you always hear, older parents telling you, oh, enjoy this, it goes by so fast. And it almost creates a sense of guilt of like, I don't know if I'm enjoying it enough, and how do I enjoy it because I'm tired.
Right.
But both of those are true. And I think that's the pleasure in parenting. It will take from you, but if you give it and you give of yourselves for your kids, the pleasure you get in return is pretty incredible.
A lot of the source of all of our misunderstandings about pleasure is not really believing that God is a good God, a God that created pleasure and wants us to have it.
Yeah. So in the book, there's two chapters just on the view of God,
Yeah.
and early in the discussions with the publisher, I remember that was one of the questions of like, shouldn't we just get right into the pleasures? Shouldn't chapter 4 on sex be like chapter 2 or 1?
Right.
And yet I felt like unless we wrestle with our view of God, the rest of this doesn't make sense. Because if I go and I tell someone, hey, God is the designer of pleasure, there's a lot of people in our country that just can't even wrap their minds around that sentence.
Hmm.
Like God is the source of pleasure, and they're like, I don't think so. And so, it gets to this view of God we have of like, what kind of view are you living with? Is God the dad who comes home, crashes your party, kicks all your friends out, reprimands you, tells you to go to your room, turns the light off, shuts the whole thing down? Or is God the dad that says, hey, why don't we celebrate? Why don't you invite all your friends over? I'll provide the food and I'll make it happen for you. Like those are dramatically different views of a father, and those are dramatically different views of God. And for a lot of us, I think our view of God fits more in the first camp of God shutting it down. And I think that shapes everything else we do when we follow Him. Then, and really, and I had the premise of the book, almost 2 decades ago, but it's only the last 5 years or so that I've really began to unpack the cultural view we have of God, especially in America, and realize that Jesus is so much better than we give Him credit for,
Hmm.
and we have added so much baggage to this that really we have to help people unpack before they can get to the understanding of, hey, it's in my best interest to trust Him when it comes to pleasure.
I think a lot of us have the idea that God, like, we're pretty secure that God is good, but that good is not always fun.
Right.
And we said those are just two different things.
Yeah, and I think there's definitely a true element to that. That a good dad doesn't give his kids dessert, every meal. So it's not like, hey, we just always get what we want. But even if you get into some of our theological topics that I think really screws people up, I just meet so many people with this weight, and a lot of people are screwed up by the Ten Commandments and this pressure on them, and so I try to walk people through that and go, hey, like I think you're looking at this the wrong way, and and then our view of hell, and with the traditional view of hell, it's pretty hard to reconcile that, in my opinion, with a good God. Like, yeah, God is good. And anyone who doesn't acknowledge that He's good, He's going to allow to suffer for all eternity, and that's a manifestation of His goodness. And I think if you look at that in logical terms, like take a step out of the Christian world for a second and go, okay, what does that sound like just to anybody else? Because as Christians, we kind of are close to that one. But imagine a government that said, hey, when we have criminals, what we're going to do is we're gonna lock them up, and every single criminal is going to get a life sentence. So no matter what your offense is, you're going to get a life sentence. There is no there's no terms here, and during your life sentence, it's not like you're just going to be locked up. We're actually going to torture you constantly. And so you're going to have a crew assigned to you 24/7 to torture you the entire duration of your life. And then that's our formal response to criminals in our nation. Now imagine any nation, established, large nation on this planet that decides that's going to be their policy. There would be global outrage in response to that. Of you cannot treat people like this. It is a human rights violation. All these things that we would say that's totally out of line. It's disproportionate, right? And yet that's exactly what we say of the traditional view of hell scripturally. And we say, yeah, that's what God does. And then we say, and God is good. And I think a lot of people go, I'm not sure how to reconcile those. So it's not just that, hey, he's not always going to give me what I want, but I think we've got some views and some theology of, when it comes to hell, or when it comes to the Ten Commandments, or when it comes to, is God responsible for evil, and does he control all this? There's a lot to unpack there to help people see that God really is good.
And it's not only that it offends our sensibilities, but that when we look at Scripture really closely, the eternal conscious torment view of hell is not as sustainable as a lot of people think it is.
Yeah, and so I argue in the book for annihilationism, which scares people when they hear that sometimes. But
Sounds worse than the other one.
yeah, it sounds. But I think it's the most consistent, most loving view that I've ever heard. And so the problem is, anytime you take a stand on hell at all, you're going to lose a lot of Christians who go, how dare you think that? And we've all watched what's happened to Rob Bell and going, well, okay, evidently people have a lot of opinions about that. And so even though I don't agree with Rob Bell, I think he raised a bunch of good points. I think it's a conversation worth having, and I think we have to land somewhere. And I just personally can't conclude that the eternal conscious torment view is consistent with a loving God for eternity. It takes some mental gymnastics, I think, to reconcile that. And so instead, I just think God says, hey, eternal life is for anyone who wants it, who chooses that. And if you don't want it, if you don't want to be with me in eternity, that's fine. I'll honor that, and you'll just cease to exist, just like you ceased to exist before your time on earth. And so, God in his loving mercy says, hey, that's how I'll do it. And to me, and again, it's not like that's just wishful thinking. I go through a bunch of verses in the book that I think lend credibility to that position. But it just allows me to reframe it and go, okay, God really could be good, and doesn't have to be this angry God in the sky that we tend to stereotype him as.
We've scratched the surface of the book. It's been really good, and I think that we've given people enough to go out and read the rest for themselves.
Yeah, I just encourage people, if we're trying to live out our faith, there's essentially two approaches we can say. Is we can give people a bunch of things that you should do. You should do this, and you should not do that, and you should do this, and we can hope that, hey, follow this list really well, and then if you do, you're in, and God's happy, and you're going to experience the right life. And as we talked about earlier, that might feel safer because we can set the parameters to that. But I really think if we just show people Jesus, and we really show he's so good, like incredibly good, and in his goodness, he's just overflowing with goodness, and he wants you to experience that. And so it's going to put you in a lot of situations that you may never choose, and it's going to cause you to choose things that you might never choose on your own. But the reason you're going to choose them is because you want to, because you see him for who he is and you're responding to that. And so it's not because you're checking off a list, it's because it just makes sense to you because of what you've experienced in him. That to me is a much stronger Christianity. And I think in our post-Christendom culture, it's time for us to change the conversation and say, hey, the old way of doing it's probably not going to work anymore. And it's going to continue to have issues. And in chapter 1, I give a bunch of statistics of, hey, we have a problem in the church today. And I think the best way to address the conversation is to say, let's reframe it. Let's focus on who Jesus is. And then let's invite people to experience him and experience transformation, and then watch what happens. And Shane, the danger of that is, well, how do we control it? How do we measure it? How do we I don't know. And yet you look at Jesus' ministry, and there's quite a bit of that element to it where, hey, I'm going to tell them a story and we'll see what they do. And you're like, well, Jesus, you probably should have given them, 4 application points at the end of that. But it's just it really wasn't his style. And I think if we could get back to that today and go, hey, let's just show people Jesus and really try to unpack some of these other things. I think the Christianity that will emerge from that is going to be incredibly beautiful.
It seems like it's really about freedom, and it's about the maximum pleasure instead of hampering pleasure, because to suffer from an addiction is not freedom. To appease every whim that we have and call that pleasure is not freedom, and it's ultimately not pleasure at all.
Right, and that's the part people don't normally talk about. Hey, you get this, but you also get all this baggage with it. And that's why in the book, I quote a bunch of people, even philosophers long dead like Epicurus, right, and talk about, hey, this is a search that people have been on for a long time, and the search is really, how do we get pleasure with the least amount of that, the least amount of the baggage, the addictions, the pain, the hurt that comes with it, and I think. The answer is, well, stop pursuing pleasure on your terms. Go to Jesus and go, hey, how have you designed me to live? And how do you want me to experience this? And when we reframe it that way, we begin to experience pleasure without all the baggage that goes with it.
Well, Jeremy, it's been really good to talk to you. Thanks for being on Seminary Dropout today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Shane.
Thanks for joining me for another episode of Seminary Dropout. Remember, you can find all the show notes for this show and all shows at shaneblackshear.com. Oh, and hey, have you ever thought about starting your very own podcast? I bet you have. And I think you should do it. In fact, I've created a course just for you to teach you everything that I've learned over the last couple of years producing Seminary Dropout. So if you're interested in podcasting and want to learn how, go check out my course. You can go there by typing in podcastingforeveryone.org. And you can get a special discount by typing in the discount code Seminary Dropout, all one word. That'll give you 25% off. So go check it out. If you have any questions, let me know. Okay. Thanks to those that left ratings and reviews on iTunes this week. Remember, that keeps the show front and center. Also, remember, you can find me on Twitter at beardonabike. That's at beardonabike. Also, I'm on Facebook, facebook.com/ShaneBlackshear123. And remember that Seminary Dropout is listener supported. You can visit supportseminarydropout.com and press Become a Patron. Remember, this music you're listening to right now is by D.L. Rossi. You can find him online on iTunes and at dlrossi.com. All right, thanks again for joining me for another episode of Seminary Dropout. Stay tuned for next week's episode. Love you. Take care.
At my best, I always seem to bring that, but